But thank you all for joining our webinar tonight. I'm Rodney Dawson, Curator of Education here at the Greensboro History Museum. As you see, I put up the disclaimer. I won't read it. I'll just give you a second to look over it as I talk about some of the other features and I introduce our guests. We're extremely pleased to have you as our audience today. It warms our heart, and you don't know how far it goes as far as budget requests when we know we got people supporting us like you are. But if you'll take the time tonight, look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that Q&A icon. And by selecting that option, you can type in any questions you may have. We have reserved the latter part of the program to field these questions. However, go ahead and put them in as you think about them. And you never know, we may get to them through the natural organic conversation, or may just pull it up before that time, but we will dedicate the latter 10 minutes for that. Immediately after this webinar is over, you can view it via YouTube. So if you know folks that couldn't attend and probably wanted to, just make them aware that they can go to our YouTube channel. Just do a search for Greensboro History Museum, or you can go to our website, greensborohistory.org, and select the YouTube icon at the top. Today's panels include Attorney James P. Mays, Deputy Police Chief Renae Sigmon, Dr. Carol Moye, and Rodney Wiles. Attorney James Mays has more than 20 years of experience working on educational and cultural exchange programs for the United States Department of State. And as a professional member of these public diplomacy initiatives, he has met and established relationships with legal professionals from around the world. We're going to take advantage of those tonight. Then we also have my new friend, Deputy Chief Renae Sigmon. She has over 25 years of policing experience with the Greensboro Police Department. She has risen through the ranks of the department and is now over the Support Bureau, which houses traffic operations, traffic crash reconstruction, operational planning, and school resource officers, as well as the housing authority officers, electronic monitoring, the SWAT team, the bomb team, and negotiations team. So she doesn't do much. All right. And Deputy Chief Sigmon has a master's degree in social work from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is why she's a Tar Heel fan. I see that now. Has a Bachelor of Arts degree in social work from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And my good friend Rodney Wiles currently serves as the executive director. He has a bio, I had to shorten his. He's currently the executive director of equity and student achievement for Guilford County Schools. And that's after being nominated for the Guilford County Schools Principal of the Year in 2009 as a former educator. I know that's not an easy accomplishment, so hats off for that. Rodney Wiles was appointed principal of T. Wingate Andrews High School in High Point, which is the city where I'm from, but I went to Southwest. And prior to this appointment, Rodney served 3 years as principal at Jackson Middle School in Greensboro, where he was the instructional leader for one of the most poverty-impacted middle schools in the third largest school district in the state, which is GCS. And during his tenure at Jackson Middle, Mr. Wiles led his faculty in meeting 100% of AYP, or adequate yearly progress, in 2008 and 2009. And he's also the former principal of the renowned Dudley High School, of which he's an alum. And finally, tonight's moderator, Dr. Carol Moye. Carol Moye is a native of Greensboro and also a graduate and alum from Dudley High School. Dr. Moye's background is in educational leadership and policy studies with an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's an adjunct professor at Bowie State University and teacher supervisor with the University of Maryland. And Dr. Moye considers the infusion of diversity, equity, and inclusion to be an essential application to all works. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for this webinar discussion, school resource officers, the school to prison pipeline, and what can be done to improve upon it. So your expertise is much needed. And I'll turn it over to tonight's moderator, Dr. Moye.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dawson. I really do appreciate that. And I just want to thank everyone for being online tonight. And so we'll really begin by jumping in. And I think the important thing is to define the role of school resource officers, or SROs, from the perspective of both the police department and that of the school system. So what we would like to do is start with Mr. Wiles and kind of get your understanding of the role of the SROs within the school systems.
Thank you. I was privileged to serve 3 schools in Guilford County as principal, and each school had an SRO. So the role of the SRO was let me back up. The role of the SRO was to work in conjunction with the administrative team, not only to provide a model of safety, but also to be proactive and not reactive. When I say proactive, planning for, heaven forbid, lockdown drills, planning for athletic events and the amount or the number of people who would attend. So it was really a true partnership in my experience with the SRO. He was, or she was, really a part of my administrative team. And that's how I viewed it.
Okay. And Deputy Chief Sigmon, would you give us your view as well?
I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Wiles. It's absolutely a partnership. In fact, the Guilford County school system and every agency that supplies school resource officers, be Greensboro Police Department, High Point Police Department, or the Sheriff's Department, that supplies school resource officers have an agreement. It's a memorandum of understanding, but it's an agreement, and it talks about the specific roles of the SRO. And we absolutely have a partnership with school staff and school administration. We want to provide a safe and inclusive and positive learning environment for students and staff. But SROs are also role models. They're encouragers. We want to encourage students for positive life choices, developing strong rapport with students and staff and families. And sometimes, having to initiate some reasonable law enforcement responses depending on the instance as well. But the biggest thing about the SRO is that relationship with the staff and with the students and the families. That is absolutely the key to success in the program.
And it's really interesting that you're saying that, because I was going to go to another question, but let me skip that, because one of the things we talk about so much in education, and we know particularly when you're dealing with children or youth, the key thing that we understand from an educator perspective as far as experience is that relationship, and research shows that that relationship is so important. So I kind of want to put these two questions together in terms of thinking about the background it takes to become an SRO. What type of training? What are you looking for? What type of background check? But also, how do you determine or help to develop that relationship from both in school and within the community? That's a lot.
That is. I will try to answer all of that.
I'll come back if you need me to.
If I forget part of it, please remind me. But absolutely, we want to make sure that the officers that we put in the schools as SROs are of an extremely high caliber. It's a competitive process at the police department. And we want to make sure that those officers have a passion for working with our youth, have a passion for wanting to mentor our young adults and come alongside the school staff to really set our young adults up for success, helping to keep them on the right path to figure out what their life goals are and kind of helping them achieve that. So once we select SROs for our program, we certainly want to make sure that they have the training they need, set them up for success as well. So they have the training that all Greensboro police officers have, tons of communication skills training when it comes to implicit bias and de-escalation and procedural justice. But we also take those new SROs and we send them to a 40-hour training class that the state puts on, North Carolina Justice Academy, that is a basic SRO program. We send them to another 40-hour class called Crisis Intervention Training, which is more de-escalation training, which really helps them develop their speaking skills. Because police officers have lots of tools on our belt, but I think we can all appreciate the fact that how we communicate with each other can calm a situation or can add fuel to the fire. So we really try to send our officers to training so they can learn best practices. And then certainly when they start going and attending the schools on a regular basis, we want to orient them along with school staff to the school environment, because that's a very unique environment. Just like Mr. Wiles can speak to, it's very different working in a school environment, like many of us know, than working as a police officer out on the street. So we want to set them up for success. We want to have them shadow an experienced SRO that has proven successful over the years. So we want to do all these things to set them up to start out well. And then certainly Developing that relationship is key. So it's not just the SRO that's reaching out and talking with school staff on a regular basis. Our SRO supervisors come alongside as well, so that if there is an issue that cannot be resolved between, for example, a principal or any school staff member and an SRO, they have that additional layer that's available to them, that's familiar to them with that SRO supervisor. So we want to keep all those information channels open as well.
Okay. And we might come back to that excellent information. Mr. Wiles, if you would please, because thinking about what Deputy Chief Sigmon just conveyed to us, thinking about those engagements or opportunities once the SRO is in the school and even through that training period. But what are the opportunities that the Guilford County Schools put into place to help those SROs and those students actually engage?
Well, I think it's imperative. It starts with the principal of that school, setting the expectation and getting an understanding with the SRO about what is the vision, what is the mission for that school. Piggybacking on what was stated earlier, the relationship piece is key. There were numerous times in my principalship where a student would go to my SRO before they would come to me or one of my assistant principals. And it was all about the relationship piece. I even experienced an SRO at one of my schools who created a scholarship. And there are SROs who are club advisors. So it's important to, not just see them as an SRO, but a part of the staff that's there to serve as a mentor, a person they can go to, not just a law enforcement officer.
Sure. And that actually just brings us to, as a perfect segue into thinking about, when you have an SRO who really has to address an issue within the school, and you're thinking in terms of as an officer and having to perhaps like even charge a student, bringing something to bear when you have to look at the situation, determine what decision needs to be made. How does that happen? And I'm throwing this back to you, Deputy Chief.
Okay, I will start out by saying that the decision to criminally charge a student is not taken lightly or made in haste. The SRO, just like our school staff, is really trying to get an understanding of what happened in an incident. Are there underlying factors that need to be understood and sorted out to figure out what led us to this situation? And then we can help figure out how we can prevent future situations as well. So it's not made in haste. It's not made quickly. There's communication back and forth with school staff as well. When at all possible, criminal charges are going to be avoided. That is key as a school resource officer. And I can speak for our school resource officers of the Greensboro Police Department, as well as my familiarity with High Point and the Sheriff's Department, that our goal is to divert students away from the criminal justice system. And I will say that in the school year of 2019-2020, when I was the captain over the SRO program prior to my promotion, 94% of the time when a school resource officer, a Greensboro Police Department school resource officer, could make a criminal charge on a student, they did not. They've diverted them to other options. It might be school consequences. It might be something as simple as school counseling. It could have been other community referral sources. So I'm very proud of the fact that 94% of the time that our SROs could make a charge, they didn't.
Okay.
And I think that's huge. And I will just add one other thing too. You were asking about what thought process is behind when we do charge and when we don't. And I will just add also, there's many things that are considered. And again, these are discussions with our school administrators as well. Is this a first-time incident? Is there a weapon involved? For example, was there serious injury to another student or a staff member? Were there school threats made? All of these things are taken into consideration before a criminal charge is made.
Absolutely. That's good to know. And I think it's important to understand that decisions are not made from an arbitrary standpoint, that there are systems in place, and part of that has to do with the connection between the school administration, the school staff, and the SRO. And I just wanted to kind of follow up on that. So when we're looking at that, who is responsible for providing the data of student charges in regards to the access from you all to the public, and how transparent is that? Can that be? Because we realize some things because of privacy, et cetera, but what information can be given out to the public when it comes to incidents within schools and charges that are filed against students?
Would you like me to speak to that? Do you want Mr. Wilds to speak to that? Both of us?
Well, let's let Mr. Wilds, and then we'll also move to Mr. Mays as well, because I know you two have been doing quite a bit of talking. But Mr. Miles, would you like to address that, and then we can go to Mr. Mays?
Sure. So obviously, we can't give out student information like name and address, but there are monthly reports that all schools have in terms of discipline data, also year-end reports, and it's giving you the number of particular incidents that happen in that particular school year. But names are not, we cannot give out the names of the students.
Okay, no, we understand that, but and I think too, you have to be careful too, because you do see reports in the news, and sometimes you can also make connections if you're not careful.
Right.
Mr. Mays, would you like to address any of this that we've been talking about thus far?
Well, some of it is a little out of my lane. I defer to what the observations that they've made. We get to talk more about, well, I've dealt with juveniles, and in fact, I've taught juvenile delinquency courses, etc. And we know that what we want to do is to treat our juveniles differently than adults, because we believe in our society that they have yet an opportunity to succeed. And so we don't want to call them criminals. That's why we call them delinquents. We don't have trials. Right? We have hearings. We don't have verdicts. We make determinations. So our system is set up, to use the word that the chief used, is to divert them away from a path in the criminal future. And I think that's good. That's a good thing, because they can't see around corners like some of the old heads can. And so, we need to, work with them in that regard.
But that's again, a perfect segue, because as we talk about the school to prison pipeline, and they could take on very different meanings. And so can you give us more of a conceptual understanding of just what that is, as we're looking at students who, the percentage who do move forth with charges and may be going into the system?
Well, there are a number of issues. There are some who believe that the school to prison pipeline doesn't exist. And there's been a lot of written research, on that. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are those who believe that this is a deliberate conspiracy to undermine the futures of especially minority school children. And so in between there are several questions that need to be asked. And it's a little complicated, because anytime you talk about law enforcement, there's all this history that comes along with that discussion. And similarly, those of you in education know that when we talk about schooling, there's a lot of history that comes with that as well. Everything from certain students being tracked and therefore not having opportunities. The funding issue, of course, is a really big issue. And but there are two questions that I would sort of frame around this discussion. And first of all, does the school resource officer mitigate or aggravate, right, the engagement that students have with law enforcement? Is their presence a help, or does it, because of how some of us think about law enforcement, does it lead to bad experiences.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that is there a correlation between the criminalization of students in the presence of school resources? And these are two very evaluated questions, of course, but there's a lot of data out there that supports a lot of different conclusions.
Mhm.
And, Mr. Wiles spoke to the reports that come out. One of the things that I always do when we talk about school to prison pipeline is to go back and look at the data, because that's where you have to start. And what you see, and I won't throw any numbers at you, but what you see is that there's a disproportionate number of Black and brown students who are suspended from North Carolina schools. That's what's there. And the disparity is glaring. And you go school district by school district, or private school by private school, or parochial school, and you'll see those numbers. Now, question, is that a result of over-policing on the part of either school officials or school resource officers?
Mhm.
That's a question, and we need to, to look at that. Well, we do know that in terms of definitions, that most people consider the school to prison pipeline the result of overzealous, zero-tolerant officials in the school, whether it be a law enforcement officer or whether it be a school official.
Mhm.
And in each case, even without the school resource officer present, suspending a child can be just as devastating as arresting them, because oftentimes we send them back into a community where there may not be anyone at home, where there may be bad influences in the neighborhood. They lose that educational opportunity because they're not in school. So it's, there are a lot of pieces to this.
Sure.
Dr. Moye, I'm
Yes.
sorry to jump in, and Attorney Mays alluded to some numbers, so I'm going to pull up a slide that he provided, if I can get to it, if I'm smart enough to get to it.
You are. We have
I
faith.
think I am. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Attorney Mays, is this some of the numbers you were referring to? And can you kind of elaborate on that for a
general
little bit?
numbers, but go advance a few more slides. And I chose North Carolina specifically to look at the Department of Public Instruction. So if you could go to the next slide.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to change something there. I can't get to it.
Oh, okay.
Let's see.
Well, so for example, Guilford County, good, here we go, So these are the 2018, 2019 numbers that are out there. And I just looked at, now, of course, the data is disaggregated. So you have Black, Latino, Asian, other multiracial, whatever. But I just looked at Black and white. And if you look at the number of suspensions for Black females in Guilford County, 1,582. And you compare that to white females, 170. That's a disparity, right? If you look at Black males, 3,287, and white males, 616. And again, the point is that the first question, why is there this disparity? And as I said, some people have conspiracy theories. Other people doing their research have pointed to some other factors. And you could go county by county in North Carolina, all 100 counties, right? And you see this disparity. In some cases, the numbers of suspensions, you take Mecklenburg County, for example, the number of Black male suspensions, 9,470. Okay. Now we can get into talking about what these numbers represent because they're packed with a lot of assumptions. But you have to look at these numbers and ask yourself the question, right? When you suspend a child, is that an opportunity for that child to make first steps towards a stay at one of our correctional facilities? And I worked in corrections for quite some time, and and it's not a good place to put a young person. It's not a good place to put an adult, but if you look at our young people, we don't want them to go there. But you look at the numbers, and the numbers are saying something to us.
Mm-hmm. So, and thank you for that information. And to continue with that, you mentioned something in terms of when looking or working with students and looking in terms of their development, emotional development, among other things, their maturity level. But there's this thought when we were thinking of factors that basically help to feed the school to prison pipeline, the concept of adultification, of looking at students, particularly students of color, particularly Black students, and perhaps seeing them or their behaviors and attributing or perceiving them as being more adult-like when it comes to offenses, as opposed to their other counterparts. And so when thinking in terms of, or whether looking at a child who may be in elementary school and they're having a temper tantrum or some other issue. And so part of this, and I think what we're also saying is, how is that perception impacting the outcomes for these students? And so while we may have, different officers in the school, we look at the administration, but we also look at staff and educators who may have a perception of a Black or brown child that is more adultified or more harshly driven and with fewer efforts to de-escalate. And so this is from what I'm hearing you saying from, I'm thinking we all have had this type of experience, and we, have to address this as well. So how do we look at this, especially what this does in the school system for these children? And anyone who would like to jump in and kind of talk about that would be welcome.
Well, let me just say this. We place emphasis in the wrong place. If you look at the annual cost, the per pupil cost, I think the last time I looked, the average cost to educate a child in public school here in North Carolina was somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000, somewhere in that range. You look at the average cost per prisoner, what we pay to keep a person in prison. In the minimum security, we're paying $25,000 per year.
Mm-hmm.
That should be reversed. So we talk about the resources that we use, right, and the results that we want, the outcomes that we want, right. We have to do a rethink.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's politically popular to say lock them up and throw away the key. People are willing to pay that cost. But if you say, well, let's fund our schools appropriately, right? Let's give the teachers the resources that they need. Let's pay them a decent salary. Let's resource the facilities better, right? Then people they slow down a little bit.
Okay.
And so we need a rethink there.
Well, that's perfect to think in terms of, knowing the reality of the school to prison pipeline, and as a former SRO and currently over the SROs, coming back to you, Deputy Chief, and as a former school principal, Mr. Wiles, how do you think when you're handling the expulsions, the high suspension rates, definitely filing charges, and yet remaining sensitive to that disproportionality that we see occurring, particularly with Black and brown students? How do we balance that? How do we address that so that we see, as Mr. Mays was saying, putting the resources in the schools as opposed on the tail end, being, as you had said before, Mr. Wiles, being more proactive as opposed to reactive?
Right. So, when I was a principal,
Mm-hmm.
when I had to suspend a child, my view was I failed. I use suspensions as the last resort, unless it was something that was just to the extreme. For example, drugs, weapon, assault. So what I wanted to utilize was my staff members, my counselors, a social worker, students have a way of attaching certain teachers, using those teachers as buddy teachers to, hey, come on and see if you can talk to this young lady, this young man, and let's get to the root of what's going on. Also, it's very important that schools, a discipline issue doesn't always require an SRO. The SRO should not be the first call. And sometimes that happens, and that's a mistake. The SRO shouldn't be involved with all discipline. So, it's very important that the staff, assistant principals, all staff members understand that, the administrative team is the first call. And then we'll go through the layers of how we can hopefully not have to suspend the child and get the behavior turned around.
Absolutely.
I would just going to add a few things. I wholeheartedly agree with what Mr. Wiles was just speaking to. SROs do not need to be in the middle of every incident in a school. And I think there is a myth at times that if a police officer, an SRO, is on school property, is a sign there that every incident that occurs, the police officer, the SRO is in the middle of it. And I can speak to in Guilford County, my experiences in Guilford County, and that is not the case. I think we are very fortunate in Guilford County. And in February of 2020, there was a school to justice partnership that was signed. It was a statement and agreement that was made between the Guilford County Schools, the law enforcement agencies, the court system, social services. We came together and said, every student conduct issue in a school should not lead to the juvenile justice system. And it stated our collective goal is to steer those students away, divert them away from the juvenile justice system. And I think that really showed our commitment in this county to try to break that school to prison pipeline, to start to make a difference there. And you heard me speak to the diversion numbers before. I think that, like Mr. Wiles suggested, suspension is a last resort. Many times criminal charges are a last resort. There are times where criminal charges have to be made, but my gosh, the majority of the time, 94% of the time last school year, they weren't made. We diverted the students away from that. So I think what's really key is looking at every incident individually, looking at the factors of what happened in every event to figure out what led up to it. Are there underlying contributing factors and causes? What's going on in that student's home? What's going on in that student's life? I think, you mentioned earlier, is it a good or a bad thing to have a police officer in a school? Is that helpful or is that more hurtful? And I'm of the belief that it's positive, because even if that young adult has observed, witnessed, experienced things in their life leading up to that point, here's a prime opportunity for them to get to know a police officer every day. It may start out as just speaking in the hallway, acknowledging each other. But what a key opportunity we have there. If there is a negative relationship up prior to that point, we have a unique opportunity to start turning that around.
Absolutely.
And so I think with good training and good communication between school administrators and SROs, we can really make differences.
So we all know perception is reality, right? And you made a great point in terms of, there are a lot of students in schools who have had negative experiences, as well as communities.
Yes.
And so that perception, whether that particular person in that school is good, bad in terms of their experiences, it still becomes part of their reality.
Yes.
And so we have to think in terms of what are we doing within the schools to impact proactively to change their perception. And I know a lot of that has to do with the actions. So what are some of the proactive roles SROs are actually encouraged to initiate. Here's my other thing, because just like we were talking about the positives, there are some negatives. When there are negative incidents, because these numbers that Mr. May spoke of, they have their research, their facts. What are the implications, and then what is done to directly impact that particular officer who may be that negative experience as well?
Okay, well, let me try to
give you the questions. I'm sorry.
Try to address all of that. And again, if I've forgotten part of it, please remind me about that.
I will.
I think when we put the right people in our schools as SROs, they have that passion to work with young adults. They have a passion to be in the schools. Mm-hmm. So they very often are coaches on sports. They run clubs, after school clubs. Not they run, they are a large part of them. They mm-hmm. mentor them. They are another trusted adult in the school environment that can relate and interact with students on a regular basis. There's so many intangibles as well that I can give you examples of, even the little things where if a young adult has had a negative contact with law enforcement before, there are things that the intangibles that SROs can do that can maybe start changing those thoughts. For example, simple things like, our SROs, if there are students that can't afford cleats for football, many times our SROs quietly behind the scenes are working to pay for those things. It might be a student can't afford to pay the rental or the fee for their musical instrument. Mm-hmm. It can be providing snacks for students that maybe are running late to school and miss getting breakfast. And they approach the SRO and say, hey, I'm really hungry. I didn't get a chance to have breakfast. And the SRO is like, hey, here's some crackers. Here's a bag of pretzels. Here's some water. It can be something as simple as those intangibles that can start working on changing that thought process, that experience that young adults had with law enforcement. So I think when we put the right people in the schools and those SROs are working with the school staff, that slowly those views of law enforcement and can start to change for the better.
Okay, and then how do we change that other perception of those SROs who really do live up to that image, that negative image? What happens with them, and how do students know? How does the public, the community know that this is just not another incident that just slides away eventually?
I can tell you at the police department, there's a few things. Mm-hmm. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, the relationship that's developed between the school administrators and the SRO. If there are concerns about that SRO and their behavior and their decision-making, as I mentioned before, there's SRO supervisors that also check by, call up school principals, talk with them and say, how are things going? Do you have any concerns? Is there anything I need to follow up on? So there's that layer that the principals have. Our SROs also wear body-worn cameras. So if there is a concern, a complaint from school staff, from students, from a parent about an interaction with our SROs, Greensboro Police Department officers have been wearing body-worn cameras for years. We were one of the first in the state to put them on our officers. And so that is another opportunity that we can check and see. As you mentioned before, I think before we even started, that sometimes there's different versions of the truth. And what a great way, that body-worn camera is an opportunity to see what happened. And if our SROs have messed up, if our SROs are not making decisions that are aligned with Greensboro Police Department policies and philosophy, then certainly there's corrective measures. Most extreme example, certainly they can be removed from the school and the police department would do our administrative due justice to make sure that, and due diligence to make sure that they still need to be a police officer, but that would be an extreme example.
Okay.
But I want just to reassure that if there's concerns, certainly the school staff members, the school administrators can reach out to the supervisors. They can reach out to other SROs and say, hey, I'm having a problem here. There's measures using body-worn cameras that we can follow up with. It may be retraining. It may be an opportunity to reinforce what our philosophy is and what our belief is at the Greensboro Police Department about SROs' roles. But absolutely, we want accountability, and we want our SROs to be doing what they should be to help keep those kids on a healthy, productive path into adulthood.
So as we're kind of wrapping up, and thank you for that, as we're wrapping up, one of the things that, and 45 minutes is just hitting the tip of the iceberg, right? This is a continual conversation. Having said that, anytime that we have a conversation, I believe it's so important to always look at, so what are the steps? What are the tangibles that need to be done? And so what I want to ask each of you is to think about, especially when working within the schools, the staff and students, thinking about understanding who students are and having that baseline of understanding between school staff, SROs. What can we do moving forward to make things better? What's one thing that each of you can think of in terms of, and let's keep in mind that we're still talking about the school to prison pipeline, having that better connectivity between students and the SRO and the staff. So I will start with Mr. Mays, if you don't mind. What do you think is something that we can move forward with?
From my vantage point and understanding that, my career area is law, and public policy, it is transparent and community-based accountability. That covers not only parents' rights to be involved in the planning for their students while they're in school, and also involves the accountability of the police department. We have to move towards a more clear, transparent, and equitable way, because right now we're at a place in this country where we don't trust our institutions. And we have all these conspiracy theories about what these institutions are or are not doing, and the people that are responsible for running them. And so I would say we lost a lot by taking civic education out of our schools, because this only works if citizens understand their responsibilities and fulfill those responsibilities, and learn how to, as well, the popular phrase today is to reach across the aisle, to work with people that may not look like you, that may be different, have different philosophies or whatever. Because if we don't work it out together,
right,
we are all going to suffer. And I'm afraid that we're headed down that road, but I'd hate to see that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wiles?
I think Attorney Mays hit it right on the head. Transparency and involving all of our stakeholders, students, staff, parents, community leaders, and the SRO, so that they can see and get a feel for what this SRO is bringing to that particular school. One of the things I used to try to do was get the students to see past the uniform if possible. So I would invite the SRO to go to different classrooms and have those two-way conversations, especially in our history classes, just so that he or she could develop that relationship and be very honest, very, in fact, vulnerable about what it is they do and why they do it. And I think that really helped in a lot of situations.
Okay. And Deputy Chief, thank you.
Just a couple of points. I think moving ahead, just from what Mr. Mays mentioned and also Mr. Wiles, I think it's key that all of our stakeholders, police officers included, SROs included in the schools, really make the most out of every interaction. Make the most out of every interaction with school staff members, with students, with parents, trying to have some sort of positive dialogue every opportunity that you get. Certainly, we train that we do not want our officers to generalize about anyone. And as police officers, just as educators and attorneys, there's generalizations about all of us. And so it's the idea of making the most out of every interaction. And I think there's such a unique opportunity, and there's many unique opportunities having SROs in the school. Like Mr. Wiles suggested, relationships are key. We try to keep our SROs in the same schools as long as we can. Mr. Wiles, when he was at Dudley, had Officer Lance for probably about 9 years. Officer Griffiths has been at Page High School for about 9 years as well. And so that really affords families and students and staff to develop those relationships. And I think those relationships are key to moving in the right direction. Certainly, on so many levels, SROs can be a benefit in the schools. We saw at Smith High School in 2018 where they stopped what could have been an active shooter situation when a gentleman came onto campus with handguns looking for 2 staff members. We saw the absolute benefit of a 39-second response from the SRO on campus. But the relationships between that SRO and the staff and the students, even after that event, and how they all processed it and talked about it from their different perspectives, really showed at another level how small interactions can carry so much weight.
And if I may, since I am technically on the panel apart, I would like to also talk about the importance of, when we talk about staff, the importance of our school counselors, our school social workers. And I can speak from experience from being in education for almost 30 years, but looking at how do we make those proactive connections with students. Again, the SRO should never be the first resort unless it is a crisis safety situation. And there should be systems in place within the school with students and teachers and staff. I've been in situations where we've had students who, where we could see there was a need, and we established touch points. When the student walked in the door, they stopped in the office, they stopped at the cafeteria, they stopped with this teacher. And I think someone mentioned finding that person who has that relationship with that student and making sure that that's a plan. It takes effort, but these are the efforts you want to put into place, because SRO should always be the last resort. And I think we really need to think in terms of, again, funding is, a lot of things just boil down to funding resources. We really need to look at how we can proactively fund resources within the schools that will mitigate a lot of the issues. If we're proactive and we see something happening, we can address it proactively because we understand that child. We have a baseline, we have a relationship.
Absolutely.
And so we can do that before a situation escalates into a crisis. And so with that, I'm going to thank the panel for all of the information and the feedback. And we do have a number of questions. And so I'm going to put the questions out there. And this is a question from a participant. I believe there is a disproportionate amount of money being deferred to SROs as opposed to counselors. If this is the case, can anyone explain why this is so?
You know, I can't speak to the exact monies that are spent. That is certainly a concern that's been brought up nationwide about there's a lot of money that is believed to be spent on law enforcement officers in the schools, and certainly not as much spent on counselors and social workers. And I can't speak to how much money the school systems allot, because I don't have that knowledge. I do think it would be a mistake to remove SROs from a school environment. But I agree that SROs have a role, school counselors have a role, school nurses have a role, and they're all critical to the success of the school environment. So I would not think removing SROs is a solution. I think certainly you can look at money allotment, but to take one component away, I think would be very dangerous and handicapping.
Is there anyone else who would like to
Just a small
respond?
comment on that. We made when I got involved in corrections back in the early 80s, we had made a switch from what we were doing in the 70s with rehabilitation. Rehabilitation had been very popular coming out of the 60s and 70s. And then we moved away from it because we believed that it wasn't working. The recidivism rates were just out the roof, right? And we went all the way to the other extreme, right? With the nothing works doctrine, just lock them up, throw away the key. Let's not do anything for them. Let's house them, right? And what we see now, that doesn't work either. It didn't change the reality. And so we have to get back to being, I'll use this word, more compassionate about assisting people. Because at the end of the day, when you leave work and you come home, you go back to a neighborhood. And the people in that neighborhood are dealing with all kinds of things. And some of them may have served time. Some of them may have just come from a mental institution. Some of them are dealing with issues. That's my point. And
Yes.
so we need to tune in and not be punitive. Being punitive is not always the answer. In fact, most of the times it isn't. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Well, actually, and that's perfect, because one of the things that we have to consider, we have children who are going back into the schools and teachers who are in the schools. And we're in the midst of COVID, and we have students and teachers who have been out of the arena for pretty much a year now, even though we've been working virtually. And so we also now have to really consider, the mindset of folks, because, there is some established trauma to coming back now, but just having survived this last year. So with that being said, one of the panelist questions is, can anyone compare arrest data between county and inner city schools pre-COVID? If so, was there a noticeable difference? With that, I would also like someone to address what are the thoughts about students who are coming in now that we've been out for a year, and how do we deal with what they will be dealing with? So I'll repeat the question. Can anyone compare arrest data between county and inner city schools pre-COVID? If so, was there a noticeable difference?
I will say that I don't, off the top of my head, I can't compare arrest data county versus inner city. I'm guessing it's being referred to like Greensboro as the inner city, and in comparison to Guilford County schools maybe that are outside of the city limits. And I don't have that data off the top of my head, pre-COVID or post-COVID. But like I did mention, certainly this last school year has been a challenging one in an anomaly in so many different ways. And so certainly there's going to be differences in data if you look at the 2019-20 school year and what's occurred so far in this school year when you don't have as many students on campus. And here we are in almost March, and middle school and high schoolers are coming back to campus. So the data is going to be different. And so it would be a challenge for me to speak to that right now. But I will agree with you that students and staff, all of us have had difficult times with navigating through COVID.
Yeah.
And we have had students reaching out to their SROs saying, hey, I know we're out of school, but will you come by my house and visit me? Will you come by and check on me? Or I need this and this, can you help me? And again, that that really reflects positively on that relationship, that positive relationship that if we went along with some potentially knee-jerk reactions of remove all SROs from schools, and you remove that relationship layer there, excuse me, you take that layer away, there's an awareness and understanding of those students and what those young adults are going through that a patrol officer is not going to have. And so Mr. Moye spoke of zero tolerance earlier, and even though our patrol officers are trained to a very high level as well, they're not SROs. They don't have the background relationship and knowledge of those young adults and navigating in the different schools. So if my child had an incident that occurred at a school, I would much rather have an SRO involved with the school administrators figuring out how to address that than bringing in a patrol officer randomly off the street who's got no perspective about what that young adult has going on in their life.
Okay, and thank you for that. And I think that's really important in making a distinction between the training, the background of an SRO, as opposed to a patrol student, a patrolman off the street. Mr. Dawson, do I have the last question for Mr. Wiles? If he can answer it in 1 minute?
Yep, we got about 2 minutes. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
So for Mr. Wiles, 1 minute to 20 seconds. With the passing of the recent bond referendum, will the school renovations and new buildings help better the environment for students, teachers, and parents? Will it contribute to improving perceptions of overall school issues? That's a heavy one.
That is, I think that's the goal. Obviously, I don't know. We want to improve every student's experience in the schoolhouse. And so, if you go back to what was the whole purpose of the bond, that was to improve our facilities and to make our facilities up, grade up to par for not only students, but staff as well. So that is the goal. And we hope that we obtain that goal.
Okay. And with that being said, thank you all. And I hand it over to you, Mr. Dawson.
Well, if I had flowers, I'd send them to Dr. Moye, and I'd definitely send them to Deputy Chief Sigmon. She did a wonderful job on a panel discussion earlier this morning with Leadership Greensboro, and Dr. Moye, I'm just always impressed with you. And Mr. Wiles, you can show that pendant you got on your left jacket there. But Mr. Wiles, wonderful principal and another wonderful educator, administrator, along with I always miss Jasmine Gattro Moore. They run the DEI office over at Guilford County Schools, and we'll be seeing a lot more of him and a lot more of that office. But thank you again to everyone that is attending. One of our wonderful series is going to be on YouTube, and also Guilford County Schools TV will be airing this. I'm not sure when, but we're going to send them this copy. So it may be tomorrow or Friday. But just look for them to air this episode, this discussion as well. And Attorney Mays, thank you so much for just being with us throughout and offering your expertise in that data. He's the data man. So I know that. But next Tuesday, we normally skip a month, but next Tuesday in March, we're starting a webinar series that will be headed up by another person on our education team, Catherine Johns. But it's new in town. Immigrants living in Guilford County. And so that series will be based around that throughout the month of March. And then in April, we're teaming up with the Human Rights Department over for the city of Greensboro, and we'll have a webinar series. But this has been a wonderful, thank you to Mr. Glenn and not Deputy Chief, I'm demoting him, Chief James with the Greensboro Police Department. And again, thank you to all our panelists and all of our attendees. We appreciate you, and job well done.
Thank you, Rodney, too. My name is Glenn Perkins from the Greensboro History Museum. I want to make a quick pitch, for I know that there was a lot of questions and people are really interested in this topic. And I want to say there is an opportunity to talk about these issues with our Democracy Table series that's starting actually tomorrow. That's a collaboration we're doing with UNCG's Communication Studies Department. Our second round of Democracy Tables is going to be focused on police, community, and justice, invites people from across the community to get together to share experiences, share opinions, and to ask important questions. So it's going to be an opportunity for you to come back, talk more about what you've learned tonight from these amazing panelists, and connect with more information. And it's a great opportunity. So I hope that you will share with that. So thank you, Rodney, for letting me make that quick pitch there too.
Glenn's our own point man. And also go on greensborohistory.org. You can take a virtual tour of Pieces of Now, which embodies a lot of what we talked about tonight. As a matter of fact, Mr. Wiles, you might be pleased to know we're teaming up with Guilford County Middle Schools and offering virtual tours with as many that will sign up. All right.